Is geskakel op GROOTplaas en ons gas saam met ons vanoggend Dr. Richard Fynn. Hy's 'n professor van Weidingsekologie by die Okavango Navorsingsinstituut om te gesels oor hergroeiende gras. Dr. Richard, thank you so much for your time this morning and good morning.
Good morning. Thanks very much for having me.
So you wrote a very interesting article regarding what you call a second bite. What is the second bite concept when it comes to grazing?
Yeah, the second bite is something that many people have a wrong idea about. It's that when a cow goes through a grassland and it eats a grass plant, so it eats it right down, and then after a week or so, it's starting to regrow. The new leaves are coming back after grazing. That is when a cow will come back and want to eat that new growth, because the new growth is very high quality. It's the highest quality, the protein, energy content, as well as the digestibility is at the highest it will be. So it's the optimum time for a cow to eat it. But people feel that if you allow the cow to come back and eat that new growth, it's bad for that grass. So they're especially worried that in the long term, you will get, if those good grasses that are the new growth that's coming out and getting eaten, if you allow your cow to eat that new growth, you're allowing the cow to eat the grass too early, and it's going to be bad for the plant. So this is the concept of the second bite. It's called the second bite, coming back for another bite. I explain in that article when it is bad and when it is good actually for the plants, under what conditions. Yeah.
So let's talk about that, because a lot of people, like you said, are leaning towards it's really bad for the plant, it's not good, but it's obviously beneficial for whatever animal is grazing in that specific area. What is the common misconception of taking a second bite when it comes to the regrowth, and that it might be inherently harmful to the grass?
So, yeah, the misconception is that, the grass is now, by putting out that new growth, it's drawing on reserves. And so you go and eat it, and then if a cow eats it, it's going to be, now impacting those reserves of the plant. You need to give it enough time before you come back for the second grazing or the second bite, that it can recover its reserves, okay? So this is true if you keep doing that to the grass year after year, no resting, then that will have a negative impact on the grass. But, and the other thing is that obviously there's in a grassland, there's your palatable grasses, the ones that the cattle want to eat, and then there's the unpalatable that they don't want to eat. So if a grass, the palatable and the unpalatable are growing next to each other, and the cow is obviously going to prefer to eat the palatable grass, the regrowth. So if you are allowing your cattle to eat only the palatable grasses and leave the unpalatable grasses, then that also has a negative effect. So over time, you're giving an advantage to the unpalatable grasses because they're not getting eaten, and the palatable grasses are getting eaten. So you're reducing the root growth of the palatable grasses, and you actually giving more space for the unpalatable grasses' roots to grow. But if you get the cattle to eat what we call in non-selective grazing, under non-selective grazing, they eat both the palatable and the unpalatable grass, and that gives the palatable an advantage. So when you're coming back for lots of rebite, the second bite, it actually gives the palatable grass an advantage if both the palatable and the unpalatable have been eaten. And then in the next year, what you've got to do is you give them a full year's rest, a full rainy season rests and early dry season rests. So it allows those grasses to recover from, maybe they got eaten 8 times that year or something like that, 8 second bites or something like that. That they would need now the next year to be given a long recovery. So we give it a full rainy season rest the next year. But in the year of grazing, it's critical that you get non-selective grazing, and that can only be done by putting a fire in the spring, or in the dry season, getting the cattle to trample everything. You've got to get the palatables and the unpalatable grasses down to the ground. Fire does it best, especially in your high rainfall grasslands. If you don't want to use fire, then, well, you can, in the high rainfall grasslands, you can put in a fire after the first rains. It's a cool fire, and it doesn't burn the litter off. Because many people, especially in the regenerative agriculture these days, they don't want to put fire in because it burns off the litter, okay, the soil litter. But you can actually put a fire in after the first rains. And a cooler fire in the morning, it burns off the above ground material, the grass, but it doesn't burn the soil, the litter that's lying on the soil, that grass material lying on the soil. So that stays intact. So, but that spring fire gets off all the above ground material of the pelletables and unpelletables, which means that when the regrowth comes, even the unpelletables, the cattle will eat it, because that new regrowth, even of the unpelletables, is acceptable to them then. But if you let it grow out just too much, 10, 15 centimeters high, then they won't touch the unpelletables. So you've got to keep on giving them this very short grass. And then, of course, you also want to concentrate your animal grazing through what we're calling high-density grazing. So that also facilitates them to eat both the pelletables and the unpelletables. So it's a combination. Use fire as well as using high-density grazing, and then let them eat that new growth, the second bite. They're getting high-quality food, and they're eating both the pelletables and the unpelletables. And this actually gives your good grasses an advantage over time. We have many experiments that show that that in the long term, those good grasses like your rooigras, that increases over time under this type of regime.
So, Doctor, obviously, if you think about before commercial farming really got as big as it is today, we had animals that were freely walking around, and they would naturally tend to go to, the younger grass that has a higher protein content, etc. Is this an issue that has only come up recently due to so much commercial farming happening compared to earlier years?
Yeah, I think it's come up because of the way we've been taught to do grazing, such as, you go to agricultural college or university, you're taught that you must use rotational grazing, and you bring the cows back after, I don't know, maybe 6 weeks or something like that. So every 6 weeks the cows come back after a grazing event. So you're doing that every year. Okay, so first of all, after 6 weeks, the grass has grown too tall, and the animals are only going to eat the palatable grasses. They'll never touch the unpalatables under that situation. So that's one of the problems of rotational grazing. You rest after a grazing event. You give it, say, 6 weeks rest, and in 6 weeks that grass has grown way too tall before the cows come back again. So now they're never going to touch the unpalatable grasses. So rotational grazing actually caused selective grazing, because it forced the cattle to only eat the palatable grasses. And then, so I think that rotational grazing, also because you didn't give it a full year's rest every second year, then those second bites do have a bad effect on the grass in the long term. Not to mention the fact that they're only eating the palatables. So the unpalatables are always getting an advantage. So this is why rotational grazing has failed. It really has. All the science has shown rotational grazing doesn't work. There's so many experiments around the world now that show rotational grazing doesn't work. And we have a paper that will be coming out next year showing this, why it's a problem. It's got to do with this not allowing the animals to get that new regrowth, and not allowing them to keep the grass short in certain areas. And remember, when I'm saying keep the grass short, it's not your whole farm. You don't want to keep your whole farm short. What you've got to do is you have certain paddocks, what we call priority paddocks. Those are the ones you choose. Okay, maybe 20% of the farm, or 25 to 30% of the farm. Those are the areas for that year. You choose that we're going to keep those short this year. That's where the cattle can get their high quality food. And then we'll have reserve grazing paddocks, which are another maybe 25% of the farm, that if there's not good rainfall and your new growth is not coming on those short areas. And so there's not enough food for the cattle on the short areas. Then you can move them to your reserve grazing areas, which were not burned, they were not kept short. So it's got much more grass. It's not, the quality is not high, but you put them in there until the rains come again, and you've got that, about 10 centimeters of regrowth. Then you bring the cattle back to immediately. As soon as there's enough regrowth on those priority areas, the cattle must come back and eat that regrowth. And you've got to always make sure that, because you're concentrating all your cattle on the farm on like 30% of the area, there's enough cattle density to keep that grass short as well. So that's another reason why you can't keep your whole farm short. It's impossible. The cattle can never keep the grass on your whole farm short. So you focus them on a certain area, and you can use now high density grazing within smaller paddocks in that priority area. Use electric fencing, mobile electric fencing, and you keep them at very high density there if you want, depending on how you want the density to be. And then you move them in that short area. So, and that's the nice thing, is you can then watch your previous paddocks that you were in, say, 2 weeks ago. And as soon as you see the regrowth is good enough again, then you bring them back again to those previously grazed paddocks. So this is simulating pretty much what wildlife does, the big wildebeest migrations and things. We know that they come into their favored grazing areas for the rainy season, and then they keep that entire area short, that favored area. As soon as there's regrowth in a particular area where they were grazing 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, they're back there again and they're eating that regrowth. So the entire area gets kept short, which is now a misconception, because many of the rotation, these approaches today, they're telling farmers, oh no, we're simulating the great big migrations by having these high density herds go through, and then they only come back 6 weeks later, or not even. Most of these, they come back only 2 months later or 3 months later. They're saying that we're simulating big wildlife migration. No, you're not. The wildlife never foraged like that. It always came back to eat that new growth, because that's the only way it could get the highest protein and energy content. So we know this. Many studies have shown it, that your wildlife comes back and it eats the new growth. But the popular grazing management strategies today are saying, no, you must leave it for 2 months before you bring the animals back. And they're saying we're simulating the big wildlife migrations. No, you're not. You're doing the opposite effect.
Now, Dr. Fynn, let's end it off. We've got about 45 seconds. What does the debate around the second bite teach us about balancing grazing theory and everything we know and already introduced into our farming with real-world farm conditions?
Yeah, well, it teaches us that, first of all, we can learn from wildlife they know what's good for them, and that's why their populations have been able to survive. Then it teaches us that we've got to know you've got to balance your animal production with your veld management, but you can actually have a win-win situation. Eating the regrowth is not a negative situation. If you make sure you implement non-selective grazing, then it actually is an advantage for your grass, and it's an advantage for your cattle. So the data has shown that, we have farmers who have been doing this and really improved their cattle performance by doing this as well. So, yeah, I think we've learned what we've learned from these situations, and now we need to implement it.
Doctor, thank you so much for your time this morning. Dr. Richard Fynn, hy's 'n professor van Weidingsekologie by die Okavango Navorsingsinstituut, om te gesels oor die tweede byt as jy 'n bietjie weiding het wat jy aangeplant het daar by jou. Dis al waarvoor ons tyd het vir Grootplaas vanoggend. Ons hoop jy het 'n lekker dag verder en ons sien mekaar weer môre.